Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you may be, or whatever you may be doing. You've joined the Common Discourse Weekly Roundup podcast. You're joined by me, Varun Prasad. You can find me on Twitter and on Gab at Paradigm Emerges. I'd also like to talk about our up-and-coming website, which, week in, week out, I keep talking about. But look, rest assured, it is coming along smoothly, and I think we'll be surprised. We'll be up and running sooner rather than later. Always remember that we are looking for your content. So if you are a writer, any kind of content producer, whether that be audio or videos, please let us know about it. Get in touch with us, because we will love to host your stuff on the Common Discourse website once it's up and running. I'd also like to make a mention of the two lads that I sit in with on our flagship monthly podcast, monthly Common Discourse podcast. That would be at Boogie Bumper and at Ted Dabrowski. Give those guys a follow. You'll be much the wiser for it, and perhaps a little happier. It'll enrich your lives in subtle ways. Look, I know I call this show the Weekly Roundup, where I look at some political stories of the week that's gone by and, pick a few choice pickings to analyze, to dissect, but it's not what I wanted to do today. Just wasn't in the mood for it. So I thought I'd do something different and wax a little philosophical on you guys, get some ideas and thoughts that I had mulling around in my head off my chest. And in particular, I wanted to speak about Western civilization, which to me it seems has come to bear, the fragility of its own existence, and the changes that we see today. They seem to be symptoms of some kind of transitional identity crisis, right? And so that got me thinking, what exactly does identity mean to a society? Is it pride? Is it traditions? Is it values? So, look, yes, it is those things. But more than that, I think it's about purpose. Because, without purpose, we float around in nihilism. And perhaps that is the natural condition of mankind. But if it is, did I say mankind? I don't know if that's a politically correct term these days. Humankind? Whatever it is. It got me thinking, what of meaning? I mean, if we float around in nihilism, what of meaning? And the deeper we go into that question of meaning, it'll always boil down to what of identity and what of us. Because identity lies at the heart of society, right? We can only find meaning in ourselves through our relationships with society. And it's this meaning that gives us purpose and a reason, But if nihilism is the natural condition, then where do we go searching for this purpose? I mean, do revelations present themselves, or do we create the revelations, that we seek? And I'm talking of purpose here because what relevance does meaning have without purpose? If we look at identity as solely meaning, or just meaning, we only see a half-finished painting, because meaning itself is meaningless without purpose. We create purpose for ourselves, and this sort of defines who we are as people, and that's what empowers society. So purpose must therefore be rooted in truth if society is to be the truest and most powerful representation of itself. And the search for truth and precision in reasoning has given us many wonders, of Western civilization. But at some point, you've got to ask yourself, is it this absolutism, this absolutism in truth, could it have created the great undoing that we see before us today? Because while this works for the components of society, such as science, economics, commerce, can that sort of absolutism, can it be stretched to encompass the entirety of the whole? What is truth and what is fact? Perhaps the great discoveries of the Enlightenment have led to a confusion between objective facts and metaphysical truths. The truth of facts must differ from the truth of morals, because morals, they're not scientific facts. Morals are a dynamic concept that dance, delicately between subjectivity and objectivity. Science is objective truth of facts and an invaluable resource, of course. But without that sort of inward reflection, we kind of I don't know, we lack that grounding. We lack the grounding that so many seek, either consciously or without even knowing it. Okay, let me kind of explain that point. What I actually mean by morals and scientific facts being sort of separate sort of domains of truth. Take for example the Kantian murderer at the door scenario. So for those who may not be particularly familiar, Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher, and he spoke of universal moral maxims, almost like a scientific maxim, pretty much saying there's one moral way, and that it's a one size fits all. It must apply to every situation across all people. So the Kantian murderer at the door scenario is a scenario. It's a thought experiment where, let's say, a murderer is knocking at your door and he wants to murder a person who's hiding in your house. Now, regardless of that person hiding in your house being innocent or not, Kant would say that it's our moral imperative to give that person up, because honesty is a moral universal maxim. But of course, many of us would actually lie in that situation to save the life of that person. And so that's the distinction I want to make. Honesty as a universal maxim is almost a scientific approach to morals, whereas we would perhaps choose a different path. We would choose a subjective path by looking at the situation. And that's what I mean, that it's a delicate dance between objectivity and subjectivity. The key difference to consider here, I'd say, is the difference between fact and axiom. Both are truths, but one is discovered and one is created. And this is where sort of, I think, Western society finds itself, lost in its quest for ultimate truth, somewhere between fact and meaning, and with no grounding to stand on. But grounding can only come through meditations on our moral fiber. Morals and values, they're the truth of our being, as they are the yardstick with which we measure intent, and our intent aligns with our purpose, which gives us a meaningful identity. And the values, therefore, are the seeds that propagate a meaningful society. It creates fertile ground for the growth of morality, and it's those pillars around which we structure our society. So like trees swaying in the wind, different morals may seem, may appear to be separate, but they grow from the same land. So moral grounding is in itself a categorical imperative. For example, rip the trees out of the land and they will die. So in the same way, uprooting and shifting morals equate to moral death. And that's what we see around us today. The old moralities seem to be shunned almost, and that those morals are dying, and that carcass of that morality or that moral world is being ceremoniously sort of mutilated. Because essentially that is what we see, today by the self-proclaimed ethics police. The moral arbiters of today lack the consistency in their moral philosophy, and therefore lack the courage of their convictions. I mean, just think about it. Can we apply the same principles of sexism to men that we apply to women? Do we confer the same standards of anti-racism to whites that we do to non-white groups? Is it okay for us to insult other religions the way we insult Christianity? Do we forcefully demand cultural diversity from non-white countries in the same way we do with white countries? Do we censor hate speech from the far left the way that we do with our conservative speech? Is it okay to punch a communist the way it's encouraged, culturally encouraged to punch an alleged Nazi, not even a real Nazi? I mean, what is a real Nazi these days? But, to punch an alleged Nazi. So if you think this person's a Nazi, just punch him. Yeah, go for it. If our moral standards shift so frivolously, we fail to exercise any moral standards at all. It all burns. There are no morals, no ethics. There's only a narrative. And whoever controls the narrative holds the power, holds the gun. And this is something that I spoke about in our podcast last week, our monthly flagship podcast, because just think about it. How long will it be till you no longer fit that narrative? And just like that, the gun will now be pointed at your head. And you'll be completely caught off guard because you'll be asking yourself, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? I did everything right. But that will be the trick, you see, because there's no right now. What is right today will be wrong tomorrow. So when morals have no grounding, it's contingent on the casual dissemination of a gender-driven narrative. Friend and foe are nothing anymore. Friend and foe are simply shades of colour that shift upon the same face. And this is the plight of our postmodern world. It's a thesis that's sort of dislodged from its cultural roots. If faith in society and is something for, if faith in itself is the soul of society, then I'd say the West has had its soul ripped out, and what's left is a dried, withered corpse weathering away with with the winds of time. Self critique, and examination, they're important tools for growth. There's no doubt about it. But over time, I'd say the purifying fires of self-reflection have become a raging, destructive force. And, bereft of its pride and faith, Western civilization has been robbed of its substance. The West has been taught to forget its roots. It's a cultural civilization in ashes, and subsequently, it's lost its own sort of sense of empowerment. You can catch a handful of the blowing debris, but it only serves almost as a relic of a forgotten past. Because as the West tries to reframe its moral center through revisionism in all sort of segments of the culture, in art, in politics, in music, in everything, there's sort of subconscious longing for the empowerment and self-belief that once characterized the West. But without the vision of what it once was, society sort of pieces together a more fragmented world in a desperate attempt to reclaim power and belief in itself. But broken pieces of the past, you can't rearrange them in haste to create a new form. The West may remember what empowerment felt like, but searching for meaning by constructing a shallow thesis supported only by a flimsy, free-floating narrative, it will only lead to failure. And the cost of failure as a society or as a culture, it's fatal. Wisdom is knowing that culture creates meaning and purpose for itself. It's a multi-layered dimension that spans eons in formation, and it revolves around the delicate subtleties of its moral underpinnings. The good, the bad, all of this gives society experience, gives society strength. But you got to ask yourself, strength for what? It's coming back to that purpose question again. Is there an end point? And if there is, then what is the new beginning point? What is the new sort of the neon genesis? The wisdom of the ages may not have offered scientific truths, but they codified truths into parables that created a platform upon which civilization was built, right? But if a new beginning means that the death, leads to the death of the moral archetype or the Judeo-Christian sort of values, then who are we now without that sort of same moral compass? What is the intent? Who tells us what our intent is? Over the centuries, members of Western civilization rose through Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy, right? Or Maslow's hierarchy pyramid. So, for those of you who may not be too familiar with it, let me just explain it very briefly. This pyramid is a model that sort of explains the needs bases of a human and how they fit into society. So, for example, the very base, the first level of this pyramid is physiological needs. So a person to function in society properly needs clean breathing air, food, water, shelter, clothing, sleep. Once that's secured, we jump to the next level of needs, which is health, employment, property, family, social stability. And from that, we jump to the next level, which is friendship, family, intimacy, sense of connection. And from there to the next level, which is confidence, achievement, respect of others, the need to be a unique individual. And then you get to the last, very sort of capstone, self-actualization, where it's a reimagining of morality, of creativity, spontaneity, acceptance, experience, purpose, meaning, and inner potential. Okay? So, over the centuries, I'd say, Western society rose through this pyramid, and it was this journey that helped shape their moral identity. But in the last decade, I would say members of society seem to have crossed over from that second last stage of self-esteem to the self-actualization stage, where they are reimagining morality, acceptance, creativity. This stage is known as self-actualization. It seems to me that, this sort of society as a collective unit seems to have reached this self-actualization stage. It's almost like a capstone to the history of Western society so far. Look, there's no research done on that part. This is just me, sort of putting my thoughts out there. But if this is the case, then I'd say that society has reached this stage only to throw everything away and build something new. The moral journey sort of sought to balance our liberty and our freedom with the disposition of our savage selves, right? Born into the sin of our primal urges and working towards redemption, working towards emancipation from the brutal world of nature. But whereas, the moral journey sought liberty, self-actualization seeks liberation. Look, I'm not a religious person, but as an outside observer, I am a great admirer for what it has given us. It's stumbled and fumbled its way over the line, but we are all sort of more enriched because of it, regardless of our feelings towards these values. But this new ideology, it sort of cunningly confuses liberty with oppression and encourages liberation from the very culture that sort of maximized freedom for all. Liberation, it threatens to destroy it all. And the genius of the cunning is to play at the natural desire for freedom. It's the hypnotic Pied Piper that leads the discombobulated away from the grand narrative towards this utopia of the postmodern world, a world detached from the so-called oppression of accountability, responsibility, and self-sustainability. But really, in reality, the postmodern utopia is a return to state control. People suckling at the government's teat, their sense of self slayed through moral revisionism. It's communism 2.0. And you have to take notice of this fact. If people say the religious morals of Western society are a blight upon its existence, then you got to consider for a moment the template used by the postmodern relativist. Because let's take a look at this. People in the West are born into sin because of the actions of their ancestors that oppressed the vulnerable through colonial and imperial rule. If their culture is attacked, then they must learn to turn the other cheek and perhaps even to make the ultimate sacrifice of culture. The motives of the agenda cannot be brought into question. All dissenters must be silenced and outcast. Strike with vengeance any who are not within the flock. The end goal is a heavenly utopia of diversity and liberation from the natural-born sin of birth in the West. Now, remove the specifics and just observe that underlying mechanism. It follows that same pattern, almost as if the archetypal story will be canonized in one form or another, as some kind of intrinsic feature of the human experience. But ask yourself this: is cultural suicide atonement for historical sin? Is it really redemption? And this is what I meant when I spoke of hastily rearranging pieces of, the broken past. Self-critique and cultural deconstruction is a tool for growth. But if undesirable elements are removed from history in a revisionist fervor, then what fills those gaps? What fills the voids? It's that same mechanism. It comes to play. The template remains the same, but the wisdom of the ages is lost. We fool ourselves into believing that we have created a new moral thesis. In effect, we hastily create a fragmented world for ourselves without the wisdom of history to guide us. We don't create. Really, we just destroy. Peace, compassion, inclusivity, harmony and diversity, these are all great ideals to strive towards, of course. No one would argue with that. But history dictates that, Justice and peace ceases to be peace if governments enforce it upon its own people. Because equality, you see, equality is an inherent feature of life and reality. It's there in the world of animals, and it's there in society. We can work together to curb the negative excesses of that inherent inequality that exists in society, but we cannot force equality on everyone, because it will lead to disastrous consequences. The strife for absolute peace and justice will lead to absolute destruction. The horrors of totalitarian regimes began with noble intentions, but the battle for ideas creates identity divisions within the national consciousness that needn't be there. The identities, then they create their own set of competing ideologies. And within that sort of crucible of absolutism, the ideologies take on a life of their own. The crevices grow deeper and society begins to crack. In today's social media driven world, the culture wars have proliferated, leading to ever widening, identity in-group echo chambers. The addiction to that like notification, it's now deciding our view of political realities rather than objectivism. If indeed cultures revolve around their own sets of values and morals, then we are in a state where what was once considered subcultures of a nation are now they're redefining their own sets of morals and values as a breakaway culture. They define their existence through the construct of the opposition as lacking in moral fiber. We are who we are, but most importantly, we are not that. We are morally justified in our superiority. Go ahead and punch a Nazi. Remember, people's shared values and moral convictions are seeds to create their own society and cultural habitat. And these closed identity groups are also symptoms of the obsession with absolutism. There can only be one way, and everybody knows in their heart of hearts that theirs is that one and only way. The academic intelligentsia creates systems of thinking that must be closed off for the sake of purity. There is no negotiation with other opposing ideas anymore. It's the reason that they seek common ground with socialism and communism. They're all closed sets of ideas. The purity of the theory becomes more important than the sort of real world outcomes of implementing such social engineering. And once it's all imbued with a moral imperative, the attractiveness to that noble but inexperienced mind becomes a romantic endeavor. The identity grows and it consolidates at the expense of that society that allowed such self-critique in the first place. And that's the irony of it all. That's what I'm saying. What is purpose? Does purpose change over time? We had one goal to create the freest, most egalitarian society that we can. But as soon as we reach that stage, everything's beginning to change. And where are we headed? Because the West now stares into the unknown, haunted by echoes of disjointed memories. And if truth is to be attained, it can only come through a recognition of what was and what is. It can only be attained by the utterances of ideas, but it is free speech and freedom of expression that seems to be under attack. If the West is to resort back to a new moral journey, throwing away everything that they created in the past, then the coming generations will witness some difficult times. The same difficulties that their great ancestors fought through to offer them the comforts of liberty and peace. The West has to ask itself what it truly wants, because the choice is pretty clear. Will it be liberty or will it be liberation? Liberty is different. We all have our freedoms. We exercise our liberty. We exercise our freedoms within society. Liberation from what? Liberation from what we have built in the past, like a snake shedding skin. Do we really want to do that? Anyway, look, that was my thoughts for the day. I don't want to bore you guys too much. I just thought I'd get it out there, talk about it a little bit. But that's pretty much brought me to the end of the show today. Look, next week I promise I won't get too philosophical. I will actually get into some sort of political analysis and look at some of the interesting events that occur during the week. And look, till then, I hope you guys have a wonderful time. Keep your loved ones close to you, because what is life without them? And see you next week, guys? Take it easy. Bye bye.